Greetings, brothers and sisters. Big things to get to today. The Kamala Harris thing, the cookie thing, the even liberal media bailing on her. I got a whole bunch of stuff on Kamala. That's going to make up the bulk of this video. Ronald Reagan Jr. saying he's not afraid to go to hell. Lifelong atheist. I'll cover that briefly. And then something to do with Trump, but I want to start here. The mainstream media, MSNBC, they posted this today. They've really turned on Bill Gates. Bill Gates owns a massive parcel of farmland. It's not part of his plans to save the planet. Well, what is it plans for? McDonald's French fries, carrots, onions, all the foods that come from Bill Gates' farmland. Bill Gates does not appear to count his farming investments as the nation's largest farmland owner as part of his broader strategy to save the climate. And again, the problem here is one's spiritual condition. So, one of the benefits of the heartfulness meditation, and something, for me, I have a talent for, is being able to read people and their intentions, because people lie to you, right? People will have a brand, and most people want to be known as a nice person. That's like one of the main things. They want to be known as a good person. They want to be known as, as somebody who is, wanting better things for everyone else. They don't want to be known as a selfish narcissist. I'm looking at you, Kamala. And so they put out this brand. But this guy has never been about other people. We know that he sexually harassed women at work. We know that, we know as Microsoft CEO, he was brutal to smaller companies, and Microsoft was just a nightmare. The evil big brother type of stuff that he was doing, right? It was just everything that you think about big corporations and big tech, Bill Gates's companies were about that. So he was never about. He's gonna have like some loving heart, and like you can just see it, right? He's not somebody who is. He's very mental, if anything. He's not a hard person. He's not a loving person or a nurturing person. So this idea that he would want to save the planet, like this is what they've pitched out there. He was never about saving the planet. They own the soil where the potatoes and McDonald's French fries grow, the carrots from the world's largest producer, and the onions that America saute every night for dinner. But they're far better known for their work in tech and trying to save the climate. Like, you don't save the climate. Like, I don't even know why that's a sentence. This person is supposed to be, April Glasser is supposed to be a writer, right? You don't say, a reporter. You don't save the climate. I guess you could say you save the planet, which is, unbelievably arrogant. But anyways, Bill and Melinda Gates, who recently announced they're getting divorced, are dividing up their assets, are deeply invested in American agriculture. The billionaire couple, in less than a decade, have accumulated more than 269,000 acres of farmland across 18 states, more than the entire acreage of New York City. So they own more land than New York City, right? They own more farmland than that's the size of New York City. The farmland was purchased through a constellation of companies that all link back to the couple's investment group, Cascade Investments, based in Kirkland, Washington. They own 70,000 acres in North Louisiana, where their farmland grows soybeans, corn, cotton, and rice. 20,000 acres in Nebraska, 6,000 acres in Georgia, and in Washington State they own 14,000 acres of farmland that includes potato fields so massive they are visible from space, and some of which produce French fries for McDonald's, because that's going to save the farmland. These land holdings are separate from their previous investments in companies that support large-scale farming like Monsanto and the tractor manufacturer John Deere. So, Bill Gates is involved with Monsanto, right, which everybody kind of knows is evil. So this is circles of his farmland from space, right, or from, wherever it is, some satellite. So what his excuse was for buying all this farmland, my investment group chose to do this. Bill Gates said on Reddit in March when asked about farmland purchases while promoting his latest book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. It is not connected to climate, he did acknowledge that more productive farming techniques can help reduce deforestation in other parts of the world. So he's saying it's an investment, and he's not going to use, any type of techniques that would reduce the level of carbon emissions on his massive amount of farmland, because he doesn't really care about saving the planet. He's not a good person, we know that, right? And now the divorce is happening. And the mainstream media is, burning him to some extent. We don't know why, but they are. And, there's no trust there between him and the American people. Everyone who's been frustrated with Microsoft and know anything about it, it's an evil corporation. And this guy's investment in Monsanto, which produces GMO foods, a corn that has a pesticide grown right into it, which is, Monsanto, people know it to be evil. Farmers and, agriculturists and, bee people. I went to a seminar on bees, my family and I, and the guy was talking about how Monsanto pesticides and, pesticides, he brought up Monsanto specifically. We went to a movie about, it was like the local beekeepers had rented out a theater and let everyone who wanted to see this movie in for free. It was a documentary, I forget what it's called, well done, about the bee die-off. And they mentioned Monsanto too, right? It's something like across the board, people who deal with, holistic sort of, whatever it is, agriculture, organic agriculture, and farmers in general, and all the farmers in India that committed suicide because they got into these unsustainable contracts with Monsanto in India, and they many of them were illiterate and couldn't sign their names, and they put X's and things like this, and they signed these contracts, and they didn't know that they were going to have to buy Monsanto seed. They didn't know they couldn't save the seeds. They didn't know that they had to buy all the pesticides, and that it was so much money that it was unsustainable. They were spending more money on the seeds and the pesticides that didn't really grow that well than they were on their original heirloom seeds that they passed down for generations. Of course, Monsanto seeds are evil. And so Monsanto just took their farmland, and there was a massive suicide of Indian farmers. Just evil stuff, right? Evil, evil stuff. And this dude right here, they're involved with it. Donald Trump said he should have shut down Twitter just like Nigeria is doing. Well, what he should have done was he had the money, or somebody on his behalf, which he should have endorsed, was a right-wing version of Twitter and all these social media platforms, where people who believed in didn't believe in the left-wing agenda. Now the left wing has all social media and most of the mainstream media, and he allowed this to happen. And now it's kind of too late for him to build a platform. It's something that he can build it, but it won't have the same energy. He had his opportunity, he had his window, and it might have saved his presidency. It might have saved whatever, but he just waited too long. I got a whole thing to do about this at the end of the video, some insights I haven't shared before, because, I just realized them today, this morning during meditation. Ronald Reagan Jr. has something he wants to tell you.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics.
See, religion is, not doing well. It's going to be the end of these religions because they haven't delivered God. They haven't worked for God. They work for themselves. They were, overwhelmed by the power that comes with, I'm going to talk about political power and religious power and things like that. But religions have become about power, right? The power of religion, and the power of religion has nothing to do with God. It has to do with manipulating people's desire to connect with God and using that desire for personal gain and for organizational gain. But what he's saying here is fundamentally untrue, because religion has less and less power now. The young people are just, they're going away from religion altogether. They're not even, each generation is less and less religious, less and less about God, too. And so this is, the power of religion has slipped away. And we can see it by all the agenda they pushed through in the last, 5 years, especially the last 5 years under Trump. All the left-wing agenda, the social agenda, it was the biggest move that we've seen where they pushed a Hollywood agenda and it was accepted by the American people. And the religions did nothing about it. Like they were, they were completely sitting on their hands. And so this guy to say that like religions have some sort of influence, we have, for years there's been this Hollywood culture, the Hollywood belief system, and it's, the so-called elite in Hollywood and these people. And they never could sell it to the American people. But under the last 5 years, they've just thrust it on people, especially young people, and they've all bought into it. And now you have a whole culture of people, young people specifically, that have Hollywood morality, right? But he wants more.
Working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
He's not afraid of burning in hell. I have a different understanding about what happens in terms of an afterlife, right? Which I'll get into more later. But let's go to Kamala because this all ties in together. So let's start here. Twitter mocks Kamala Harris for passing out cookies of her faceless head to reporters. No, that really happened. This isn't fake news. This is one of the things where I had to double check it because I couldn't believe it happened. Much ado about Kamala Harris handing out cookies styled after her. Kamala Harris handed out cookies bearing her likeness to White House reporters. And here they are. Here it is. She literally handed this out, her signature pearls here, her pearl necklace, which she's also known for, the pearl necklace. And can you believe the narcissism? Because she didn't bake the cookies, right? She's a feminist. You understand this, right? She didn't, She commissioned somebody to bake cookies of her own face. She paid somebody and said, hey, can you make some cookies, Kamala cookies? Her face is, you can't, it's hard to make a face. But can you make a Kamala cookie for me? I can pass them out to the White House press corps because that's how narcissistic I am. I just even, this is stunning. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has divided opinion on Twitter by handing out cookies bearing her likeness to reporters. According to Fox News, Ms. Harris handed out cookies styled after her official White House portrait to reporters while traveling on a plane to meet the president of Guatemala. And so this is, something the mainstream media isn't covering. But how bizarre is this? How narcissistic? And the liberal media, and I'll get into them because CNN was hammering her for other things. Joe Biden screwed her over by putting her on this task force to deal with an immigration problem that can't be dealt with, can't be solved. And I want to get into that as well. But in terms of, this is, the tip of the spear of how effed up she is internally. This is exposing her poor decision-making and narcissism. The Democratic insiders and the reporters, what is she doing? How messed up is this? This is exposing what she has inside. Imagine going to anywhere, going to your job and handing out cookies with your face, with your with your personal cookies. Look, everybody have a personal cookie. That level of narcissism and cluelessness. And it led her to a major gaffe and, so many things. Let's get into that here. Well, first, let me say this. This is somebody from the New York Post. Biden throws his clueless vice president under the bus. Like many other women before her, Harris has been tasked with coming in late to clean up a mess made by her boss. Joe Biden probably wouldn't do too well in a Jeopardy contest or even on a circle of word puzzle. But he's smart enough to know that when you have a problem you can't solve, you should grandly announce a plan to deal with it by fobbing it off on somebody else. And this is Politics 101. This is where you have a complete nightmare situation, especially as a president, as an administrative person. And so you destroy somebody else's career by giving them this problem that can't be solved. And then they become the face, literally, her cookie face. This is a major gaffe. Like, this is just unbelievably stupid. Like, this is, if we had real media, this would be the face of her disastrous and Biden's disastrous policies on our southern border. Like, this is, like John Kerry windsurfing. If you remember that ad, I showed that a while ago. When you have a gaffe so bad, when something is unwinnable and like is a horrible like situation politically to be in, and they want to blame it on you, and your boss is basically handed you a turd and say, hey, you take a hot potato turd, right, and is making you be the one who is responsible for something, so they can wash their hands of it, right? And her doing this cookie thing is like the face of it. And so even the media turned on her. Let's go to that. CNN turns on her here.
Along the border, this is something that is a tough mission for her, especially given the enormous problems that the U.S. is facing along the border.
It is. And, I talked to her last month, I believe it was, about the fact that she wanted to go to do this because the mission as she defines it, and now as the White House defines it under President Biden, is to deal specifically with the Northern Triangle countries, specifically with, as she says over and over again, the root causes of migration and specifically undocumented immigrants coming to America.
So first they restate the talking points. Like, these are her talking points. These are Biden's talking points. They always do that because they're a shill organization, just like Fox used to do it for Republicans before they turned on Trump. I don't know what they're doing now. They're kind of lost. But this isn't journalism. But even these guys, so they're shilling for Joe Biden, and in this case Kamala Harris. And even with that, she's doing such a bad job, they start to set in on her here.
What she has been plagued with, in some ways by conservative media, and other ways some legitimate questions is, well, are you limited to that, or are you going to also look at and talk about the actual border, the U.S. Mexican border? And she hasn't liked those questions that she's gotten on this trip. She first, with Lester Holt in an interview on NBC, said that I'm not going to the U.S. border, just like I haven't gone to Europe. And she got clearly agitated when somebody asked her that question.
So I'll show you that Lester Holt thing. You've probably seen it already, but I got to break that down in a second here. But first, this is CNN turning on her. First, they restated the talking points, which Kamala Harris said over and over again. I watched more of the interview with Lester Holt, and their main talking point is we got to get to the root causes, because they don't want any attention on the border. Like, the border is such a disaster caused by Joe Biden's policies and his campaign, his campaign positions, and Kamala Harris was, of course, a part of that. And they were winning campaign positions for him, but they weren't something that could translate into good policy. And so he's created a disaster where everyone thinks it's an open border based on his rhetoric in the campaign. But they don't want any focus on the border itself, so they're saying it's the root causes. And if there was real journalists, they would say, you mean you're going to go and change the economic fortune of Mexico and Guatemala and some of these other countries in Central America so that people will want to stay there? Because that's what they're saying, that they want to dump enough money in there to help people make a life for themselves in these other countries and not try to come to America illegally. And that's impossible. Like, we can't even, our own economy's floundering, right? Like, we're going down the toilet bowl, and we can't, carry other countries that are doing worse with us, right?
In some ways it's understandable because that's not the mission she's on specifically now while she's there. But in other ways, it will be interesting to see how she's handles it now, because she will be asked.
Yeah, she certainly will be. And David, as you know, she's getting criticized from the right for not showing up and viewing what's going on along the border, per se. She's in Guatemala and Mexico City, but she's also getting criticism from the left when she says, do not come. She's telling these folks, do not come to the United States. They want to escape an awful situation and seek asylum here in the United States, and she's telling these folks, do not come.
Yeah, and I think the president's language was a little bit different earlier. He said, do not come now. There's a substantive difference between the two. You know, America, I mean, I'm the son of a refugee. America's always been a place where people came who were fleeing the kinds of conditions that people see there. And I heard someone in an interview earlier, someone in Guatemala say it's the dreamland.
Well, maybe it was, but, now it's the beginning of a nightmare, right? It's the nightmare land. And so this is David Axelrod. He used to be in charge of Obama's campaign, and he was maybe his chief of staff or something. But what the left is having a problem with is Kamala Harris saying, don't come. Like, just don't come. And that's actually a good thing to say, even though it's not going to have any real, teeth behind it. I showed you her saying this. And the problem with this is, for the left, is they want open borders or something. I don't, they don't tell them not to come. And when they, not only are they causing a crisis in America, on America's southern border, but they are suffering. Kids are suffering and people aren't making the trip, right? They're going across the desert. And so, this is how bad the left is. And the right, it's just, I have a whole thing to say about this. I want to get through all these clips and things. But, it's a disaster that Joe Biden just dumped on her. It's hilarious how bad he dumped this on her. And I want to talk about that more because he screwed her over so bad. It's just, and she knew it. Like, she's been avoiding it. And she's kind of bummed because this is wasn't what she was promised for not really being electable, right? She brought nothing to the table. But let's let them finish up here.
It's where, it's where we want to go to build a life. You don't want to deny them that. But the reality is that she's quite right. The trip is dangerous right now. Because we're not in a position to process them in the way that we should be able to in the future. So, but I think that, what she is learning is language on these trips are listened to very, very carefully. I was bewildered by her answer to Lester Holt on why she hadn't visited the border, only because she's been preparing for this trip for weeks and weeks and weeks, and anyone who was briefing her would have said, this question is certainly going to come up, and so how are we going to answer it? And she looked like she was, she was irritated. She also looked like she was kind of winging it on that answer. And as someone, who's been involved on the other side of this process, that struck me as very, very odd.
Yeah.
See, that doesn't seem like harsh criticism to people who hate Kamala in the truth community or on the right or whatever it is. But for CNN, this is brutal. He just called her an amateur. And the administration being amateurs. That she got upset at a question she should have known was coming. She gave a flippant answer to a disastrous situation that involves people. They're not even getting into the cookie thing. They don't even want to touch that. But it's like amateur night because she didn't earn her position. She wasn't good at being a politician and getting elected. She's not, this is where and I'll cover this. I want to go through this. I want to go to the Lester Holt comment, and then I want to go to Geraldo, who defends her but then bails on, like Geraldo do. And then I want to, talk about what this really means. But this is brutal. What he just said was brutal coming from a Democratic operative and CNN. It's amateur night out there. And of course it is, because, she didn't deserve this, right? She didn't deserve this position.
What happened in the past. And again, when you look at what we're doing now, you're seeing progress. And so let's not overlook progress.
You want a cookie? I have cookies. Can I give you a cookie? I brought some cookies. She just said, let's not overlook progress. There's no progress. It's a disaster. She's gone and talked to some people, and maybe they're going to dump some money, but it's not going to stop people from coming. This is going to happen every spring, And it might happen all year round. We don't even know. And she's on the hook for this thing, and she knows it. Joe Biden completely screwed her.
Just quickly put a button.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border.
See, this is because Kamala Harris wasn't vetted, and I'll come back to this because I want to talk about this in depth. But the way that the media handled Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was to not, have them campaign and not do tough interviews and answer tough questions and things. And so now she's getting tough questions because inevitably this was going to happen. Like Trump was going to disappear no matter how much the media tries to keep him alive. And now she's getting tough questions and she can't handle them. She can't handle being vice president. Like she doesn't have it in her.
We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making. I'm not discounting the importance of the border.
Well,
the point he's making is that she hasn't been to the border. It's not rocket science. There's, no reason for her not going to the border if she was really wanting to solve this problem. The only reason she's not going to the border is because it will bring news media and coverage to the border, and they're trying to keep people from seeing what's going on there. And so she wants to distance herself, and the administration wants to distance themselves from that nightmare. And she wants to go to Guatemala and talk to presidents and make this about, diplomacy, go to Mexico and Guatemala and try to work the political angle of this thing, but not get into the crisis itself. And she can't say that, right? And she was hoping that the Olay defense, this is, back when I played basketball, we called it Olay defense when you just, were like a bullfighter letting the bull go right past you, right? Like you have to stand in front of you're playing basketball, you have to stand in front of your opponent, right? You can't let the person just walk right by you and lay the ball in, right? You have to play defense. And the media has been playing Olay defense on her and Biden, and now they're not. And it's going to get worse over time, and she's clearly not up for the challenge. Look at how defensive she's getting. And that comment, well, I haven't been to Europe either. I haven't been to Mars. Yeah, but there's no border crisis on Europe. We don't have a European border. And so, what's your point?
I mentioned it because I know Republicans have certainly come at you on this, but Democratic Congressman Cuellar has a border district, has said to you and the president, come. You need to see this.
Listen, I care about what's happening at the border. I'm in Guatemala because my focus is dealing with the root causes of migration. There may be some who think that is not important, but it is my firm belief that if we care about what's happening at the border, we better care about the root causes and address them. And so that's what I'm doing.
They're trying to spin this thing. I said that's before. The main talking point is the root causes. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't go to the border. You're out there anyway. You could still go to the border and address the root causes. I can't do both. Well, what are you talking about? I can't get to the root causes and go to the border. I mean, you have to cross the border to get to Guatemala. You're already there. Right? So that's not a real answer. You could do both. She was, I want to focus on the root causes. I want to take the focus away. No, because as soon as you go and show what's going on there and show the crisis that's happened, based in your political campaign and your policies, then it's going to be a disaster for you guys. And it's a disaster that will ultimately bring down your presidency and vice presidency because it's a real crisis, a crisis that affects Americans and will affect Americans for the foreseeable future. So let's go to this Geraldo clip, and then I'll talk about this more in depth.
I really deeply admire her. No, I do. She's a historic figure. She's very, very important.
That's not enough, though.
It may not be enough.
This is what happens when you choose your vice president based on gender and skin color rather than actual talent and expertise.
We're
seeing that disaster unfold right now.
That's so mean.
Oh, it's
She
mean.
was
It's
Attorney General
actually
of the
true.
state of California. She was a United States Senator. You can't demean her. She has a kind of a quirky nature that when pressed, remember in the presidential primaries, how unpleasant she sometimes comes across when she's under pressure.
Good thing she has a job that doesn't involve having any pressure. What are you talking about, Geraldo?
And it cost her the early exit when she was running for president. And I think this trip is a disaster.
So I have some, I don't know, we want to call it deep insight about what's happening, why it's happening. I've talked about this in, different kinds of ways over the past, I don't know, so many years. And now it's happening and how you can't avoid it. The collapse of our civilization and what they're trying to sell everybody. So I want to get to that point. First, I want to use the Kamala Harris situation here as an example of how these things happen. And then I want to talk about, how it affects all of us and how it's unavoidable, but it's something that we can get through. But everyone has to work and adjust themselves and, adapt to what's happening, which is the collapse of our civilization, right? The collapse of our way of life. And so sometimes in life you want something so bad. There's a scene from the movie Excalibur, which I rewatched. I thought it was a great movie when I was a kid. I was in high school or something. And I rewatched it. I'm like, oh, it's pretty horrible. But this is the, story of King Arthur and his father, Uther Pendergast. It starts off where Merlin says, Uther Pendergast is lusting for another king's wife named Igraine, and he has to have her. And Merlin's like, what are you doing? Like, we just worked so hard for you to be king. And they were at a party where they were celebrating a coalition where they joined together, and Uther was going to be the main king in charge, right? So he was going to be put in charge, and this other king, I forget what his name, it's not important, has his wife dance for everybody, and Uther gets obsessed with her, and so he can't let it go. And so Merlin brings up the dragon's mist and says, the fruit of your lust I'm going to take, which became King Arthur. And so Uther ends up dying afterwards, but he ends up being disguised as Igraine's husband, and he ends up taking her, right? And then ends up marrying her afterwards because he kills her husband. But then he dies, and, there's just consequences for your actions. Like, you want something really bad, and you don't care how you get it. And what they wanted, what the media wanted, and what the Democrats wanted, and all these social media and the establishment wanted, was to get rid of Trump. And going into the election before COVID, they had no chance of beating him. I looked at these candidates, and this is where I want to get into talking about this in just a bit. And I was wondering are they wanting Trump to win, or are they just completely clueless because none of these candidates could beat Trump? They didn't have anybody who could beat Trump. Bernie had the most enthusiasm. Bernie was a populist candidate, somebody who appeals to the people. But there's not enough socialists, there's not enough really hyper-liberal people that would vote for Bernie, because there's a lot of people who are in the center, Democrats who are centrist, that are moderate, and they would never vote for Bernie. They would choose Trump over Bernie or not vote at all. And the hatred for Trump, like sometimes in life, in terms of the American culture, you will root against somebody. You'll root against a football team. Like they say, anybody but Duke, right? Duke is, so many people hate Duke, the basketball, the college Duke, the basketball team, the Blue Devils, and they want anybody but Duke to win, right? Like they go into the tournament hoping that anybody but Duke would win. LeBron James is another person, Tom Brady another person. They hope that, anybody else would beat them. In fact, when LeBron James left Cleveland, I remember one Cleveland resident that I talked to saying, I hope the Mavaliers win. Or somebody posted that on Facebook. I think it was one of my heartfulness, I couldn't believe it was a basketball fan. So that's why I think I remember it. But the Miami Heat played the Dallas Mavericks, and they were calling them the Mavaliers because all of Cleveland was rooting against LeBron because of his decision to leave and all those things and the way he handled it. And so there are times in life where people are so hating on somebody, maybe for good reason. I've talked about how hatred's inside of you, but they don't like a certain team or a certain player or a certain candidate or a certain party. And even though they don't really love the other candidates, they don't love the other teams, they're not fans of the other teams, they root for them and they become fans of those, candidates or teams or whatever it is, just because they are defeating or they're going up against something or somebody they really detest, right? And so this is a very common thing. And so with the Democratic candidates, there wasn't anybody but Bernie that people actually really enthusiastically loved. There weren't many Biden fans, and there certainly weren't very many Kamala Harris fans. And so most of the candidates weren't known. And when you watch the primaries, when I watched the primaries, I was stunned at how bad all these candidates were. They were unappealing, unlikable. They weren't good at being politicians. Like they just weren't. Barack Obama had charisma, whether you like him or not. Bill Clinton had charisma. Even George W. Bush had something, right? Something that appealed to people. Maybe not you, but to some people. Like, they inspire some people. Barack Obama and his, yes, we can thing inspired people. And so did, Trump, right? Trump inspired people. And people love Trump. People love Barack Obama. Nobody really loved Joe Biden. Nobody loved Hillary, right? So all they had was that they were running against Trump, who the left really hated. The media hated Trump, and all these, various institutions, social media, they were all against him. He was the devil, the demon, right? He was, compared to like Hitler and, various diabolical figures, villains. And so this is what so many people were voting for or voting against. They were just obsessed with Trump losing. And as I watched these debates, and I watched them, right? I watched this coverage, and I covered it because I was like dumbfounded on how bad these candidates were. I'm like, how are these people successful? How are any of these people successful in life, right? They're all weird and, they're all difficult. Tulsi Gabbard was a little bit, almost like a little bit of a truther. And she's a little bit more like a truther now, but very military, very tough. And the rest of them, like Marianne Williamson and the Yang guy, they were not really politicians, but still odd. And I'm like, how are any of these people, just good at anything? Like, so much so that they have money and backing and, they're running for president. Like, it just didn't seem possible. And Joe Biden was by far the worst. His mental faculties had broken down, and he had just one thing going for him, name recognition. He was vice president, and he had been vice president under Obama. And so a lot of these Democrats were still, part of the establishment, the Obama-Clinton core group of centralized power that wanted no part of Bernie Sanders and, to some extent, Elizabeth Warren, who were running as liberals, the AOC crowd, right? The younger crowd. These were the old-time establishment moderate Democrats that are owned by corporations and, they're completely corrupt. And Joe Biden was their guy. So he had name recognition and people knew him, not just, in political circles, but nationally. He was the most famous candidate, and he was polling about 20%. But I was like, there's no way they're going to let him win because he's drooling on himself. He can't even, he got up on stage and walked the wrong way, and he challenged people to push-up contests, and he couldn't answer questions, and he was making mistakes. He obviously had broken down. And he was a guy that failed 3 times before to poll above 1%. Like, he didn't come in second or third. Like, he was never, he never had a chance of becoming president based in his political skill. He plagiarized speeches, career politician, just a dope, right? I mean, even when he was younger, especially when he was younger, and it got worse as he, grew older. And so he, would never win the presidency based on being likable, based on being, anything that he could produce that would make him a good candidate. His performance as a candidate would never win him the election. And somehow they chose him. Like, I don't, I mean, just when they narrowed it down, he was their only guy, their establishment guy. And so I'm like, wow, they're just conceding here. Like, they're just exposing their bellies and allowing Trump to win. And I thought it was just to provoke more tension, more, racial tension, more, I mean, everything. Trump was so divisive, and they had pushed through so much of an agenda because of Trump. I mean, there's so much that happened under Trump's presidency of the country going severe left. I mean, think about the social and the cultural and the political changes and all of it that have happened under Trump presidency. So he was a windfall for them because people were so triggered, and they pushed all these things through. But what they had learned from social media that helped Trump win against Hillary, and what they had learned from, the passivity of the American people. Like, I had no idea that there would be a COVID thing. I couldn't imagine a way that Trump would lose. But think about the astronomical effort they put into in creating the circumstances where they hid Joe Biden away. They took the highly unlikable Kamala Harris as his running mate, two unlikable people, poor politicians. Kamala was even worse. Somehow hid them away and changed the whole electoral structure based in COVID and all the stuff that they had to do to make this thing happen, right? Instead of just getting a quality candidate who was either likable, it's not that hard to find a likable person who had personality that people could connect with, and, somebody who had, some competence as a politician and a leader, mental competence and things. I mean, one of those two things. They didn't even have to have both of them. Just somebody who could be competent, that people would think was competent. But the American people are so dumb and so, completely oblivious, and they just have bought into whatever, right? I mean, so many people, it was anybody but Trump, going back to the Duke thing. And they were told that Joe Biden was the only guy that could beat him. He was the only person that could beat him. And so Joe Biden came in, and he had promised to make a woman the vice president because, feminists. And then it had to be a woman of color because everything that was going on with BLM and the things that were going on during the electoral process. And so he was forced to pick from a small circle of candidates, and they figured that Kamala was the best one. They liked Kamala for whatever reason. And she was a unique sort of mixture of various demographics. She was also Asian, right? She was also East Indian. And so, that alone would cause maybe a 1% difference in voting. And so, they picked Kamala. But neither one of them earned it, right? Neither one of them was a good candidate. And that's what the, whole political field is supposed to be about. Again, like, I don't vote, and it's all, a joke anyway. But you go through political tests and likability and your ability to connect and inspire confidence in the American people or, whatever country you're in. And that's why you have elections. Because it's training ground, it's a vetting process for your ability to be president. Because the same sort of things that you do during the political campaign is the same bullshit stuff that you're going to do as president, right? Convincing the American people, getting them to go along with things and selling things to the people that they, don't want to have, understanding the political climate, understanding your ability to connect to people and what it takes to get people, motivated and all of these things, right? And if you can't do that as a candidate, you're not going to be able to do it as a president, no matter how much the media or social media is behind you and how much they censor other opinions. You got to understand what people think and what they believe. You got to be able to connect with them, and you got to be able to motivate them. You got to be able to move them in some way or another. And either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris could do that. In fact, Joe Biden, even with all his name recognition, he had so much money behind him, so much establishment behind him, he couldn't connect with the American people And Kamala was even worse. And I said this back in 2019. They were really pushing Kamala. Like she was one of their chosen ones. There was plenty of other candidates that were, just in it to get their name out there and be on stage on the debates and, promote themselves. But they had no chance of winning. They had no chance of being vice president. But they really liked Kamala. The media was pimping her out there. Chris Matthews was suggesting that it would be a ticket of her and Biden, Biden being the president and Kamala being the vice president. And they were even floating that idea out there before the first debate. It didn't make any sense. And she got a little progress. She made a little headway, and she stuck out for a little bit, her and Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren got up to 20%. And they asked Liz Warren, what it would cost, Lizzie Warren, what it would cost for a health care plan. And she said like $36 billion or $1 trillion or something. It was trillions. There was some amounts of trillions. And that kills her candidacy. Like you never tell people how much it's going to cost. It's amateur night over there. And for a little while, Kamala confronted JoJo, and they, pimped her out. They really pushed her. They really hyped her out there. And the next debate, she was attacked and she fell apart. Nobody liked her. She was, really bitchy. She, had an attitude like you saw with Lester Holt. And she was, kind of a prima donna and, short fuse. And she just isn't good at it. She isn't good at being a politician. She's, she has that weird laugh, that cackle. And so she's not somebody who, connected with people. People just didn't like her. And then she started polling below 1% and just stayed there. So she didn't earn anything. She sucked as a candidate. She sucked as a politician. And so did JoJo, obviously. But they pushed this through by making this all about Trump, right? They pushed this through by making this, singularly about Trump and anybody but Trump. Trying to demonize Trump, trying to blame Trump for everything, and then just fixing everything, against Trump in every possible way. And Trump feeding into it and going along with it. And then all the stuff that happened, post the election. But now the consequences of having two people who aren't competent, like you could hire an actor, like they got Ronald Reagan, right? You can hire an actor to act presidential and just read a script, but they can't even pull that off, both of them. They're both horrible because they didn't, go through the process, the vetting process, which is the election, going out and campaigning and all these things. They didn't do that because they suck at it. Neither one of them could have pulled it off. They couldn't have won the presidency. Everything was about Trump. And so then the second phase was maybe they'll phase JoJo out, right? Maybe they'll get rid of JoJo and they'll put in Kamala. That's what, was the logical step. But JoJo Magoo has enough political savvy left that he realized he had to do something to bury Kamala. So he stuck her on this border crisis, probably his handlers more than anybody else. And so there's obviously some conflict between the pro-Kamala and the pro-Biden camps, right? Kamala with her Dougie Fresh husband. And so, like, even then, JoJo's desperately trying to cling on to his presidency by making the alternative somebody that, like, everybody feels like failed at the border. Plus, she's just not likable. Like I said, if she became president, she would become unlikable so quickly. Like, everyone would end up hating her in a very short period of time. She's just one of those people that people don't like. She is, abrasive. She doesn't have the personality for it. And the country's a mess. So there's no, there's going to be consequences to all of what they did to get rid of Trump. And either one of them, whether it was Trump or Biden, there was going to be an economic collapse that they had to deal with. There was going to be changes that have to be dealt with. And this has been, a long time coming. This is the main point of the video. I'm going to have to make it again, and I'll have to redo this point multiple times because it has to be said over and over again for people to, absorb it. Repetition is important. And so this is, first there's a shorter version, which I just described, where they want to get rid of Trump and all that they did to get rid of Trump. So there was that. And now they're dealing with two incompetent candidates, right? Two candidates that can't, cut the mustard. So that's the short-term version, right? That's the short game. But the long game version, this is the system itself, and I've talked about this in the past. Your ancestors, 3 generations ago, 4 generations ago, whatever it was, they were told if you leave your farm, you leave your village, you leave your family, I've described this in so many videos. If you leave all these things behind, all of your skills, all the things you needed to survive, your multifaceted skill set, your relationship with nature, and you go live in the city and you have one specialized job, you only have to work so many hours a week, and you'll have all this money and free time to do what you want. So that was sold to our ancestors, forced on them to some extent, right? Pressured off of the farm or off of, whatever it was. But they all, went to the cities, adopted a suburban and urban lifestyle with this promise that the system would always be there for them. The only reason to leave your skills behind was if the system was always going to be there for you, was always going to take care of you, and everyone became addicted to the system. And so this promise was there, and people left their survival skills at the gates of the city, right? As they entered into the, Emerald City, thinking that, all right, we'll no longer need these things. And their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, their children all, have less and less of these abilities. But the system is extraordinarily short-lived, which they knew, the people who were creating, making this promise. But they didn't care because they were just looking at the short-term gains and whatever other nefarious reasons that were there. They got people to be addicted to the system, made them more and more narcissistic and materialistic, destroyed the family, destroyed people's connection with God. They corrupted the religions, right? Made them about religious power, because people who go and become politicians, they want political power. Going back to JoJo and Kamala Harris, they like the power. Now, maybe in the beginning, they want to change the world, or they have some inspirational reason for becoming a politician, some driving reason. Maybe it's a positive one, making the world a better place. But then they get corrupted by the political power, or they think, okay, the only way to get things done, I want to change the world, I have to get more and more powerful. Because obviously when you come in as a newbie, you don't have a lot of power. And so they want to change things, and they're told, if you want to change things, you got to go deeper into the beast, go deeper into the system, and they keep on going deeper, and then they lose their humanity, and then all that's left is the power, and they get obsessed with it. They forget the reason they wanted the power in the first place. Now they just want the power. It's the same thing for religious power. Religious power is even more powerful than political power, because the hearts and the desire to connect with God and the people is being used as the catalyst to motivate them, right? Political power and religious power are about, having the power of the people behind you. The collective people, the collective, military and governmental budgets, as well as, and for religion, it's people's faith and what they're willing to contribute for their faith. And so both are very powerful, and both have been completely corrupted. And so it's become more and more obvious to the powers that be that what they're dealing with, recently in the last 20 years, is an economic collapse. The whole system collapsing. It's coming to an end. The end of the Kali Yuga. God has, it's been written as part of the divine script. And instead of accepting that, they've made people even more dependent and addictive with the internet that's created so much, disconnect from real life and people. So they've made it even worse, where each generation is even more dependent on the system and less capable of surviving. It's so weak. This current youthful generation is so weak and so addicted, and now they're, feeding them Hollywood morality on top of it. They're making it even worse instead of preparing everybody for what is, what is inevitably going to be the collapse of the system. And so now it's happened, right? The system's collapsing, and the way that they're thinking about this, or the way that the controllers, so-called controllers, are presenting this is that your lifestyle, you're eating meat, you're eating cows, you're driving cars, your hedonism, you're owning a house and land and things like this. All the things that they, they made the housing market, right? They wanted people to buy houses. They wanted people to buy and drive cars. They wanted people to eat steak and, pushing the meat industry and all these things, right? This came from them. They wanted people to be hedonistic and have a shopping mentality. And to pull that off, right, for America to pull that off, we had to harvest resources from other countries. So the military-industrial complex and, the American policies and they made the dollar the world reserve currency. So the American government could just print money without, any thought of it, right? And now they want to take all those things away and blame it on all of us, right? Like it's our fault. Oh, you guys are warming the globe with your lifestyle. What, the lifestyle that you sold us when we were living in tribes and farms, when we were, happily living in an agrarian lifestyle where we had more skills and a deeper connection to God and nature. Yeah, that's our fault, right? Yeah, we should have never been forced to come to the cities by you guys. We should have resisted harder because you guys made a promise, the people that control the system made a promise that the system would always provide this lifestyle for all of us, knowing full well it wouldn't. They knew what happens in a debt-based economy. They knew what happens in a usury economy, right? It's not like it wasn't ever tried before. And you see they're having a hard time selling it. Either they just suck at selling it or they just want to demonize one group or another. The American people aren't buying it. They've been able to force it on the Australians and the Europeans a little bit more, but people aren't buying into it. But they got the kids, right? They got the kids living the Hollywood lifestyle, the kids feeling guilty for their privileges, right? The so-called privileges that the system gave to everybody and promised to people. Oh, if you make a lot of money, you'll have these privileges. You guys and your privileges, yeah, but you're the ones that promised these privileges that divided the family, these privileges that made people feel lonely, these privileges that exploited people all around the globe by harvesting their resources and turning them into a slave population. These privileges that have distracted people away from God and all these things. I mean, that's the worst one. These privileges that have made people entitled and weak and mentally ill. But the problem here is that they can't provide this lifestyle for everybody. This is what we have to deal with. That they, gave us false promises, false entitlement, false dependence and addiction to a system that eventually was going to collapse, and now it is. And we have to deal with that. You can get mad at them and say, oh, wow, you guys, made these promises and you got us all addicted to this lifestyle. Now you're trying to take it away. But ultimately, this is out of their hands. This is, coming from the divine, right? This is coming from God, that this was inevitably going to happen. And materially, we're on the sucky end of it. But on a spiritual level, that's why I talk about the heartfulness meditation, there is a true blessing here. As our material circumstances and prospects disappear, our spiritual prospects, our ability to evolve spiritually and grow and connect to God is opening up, right? The materialistic system goes down and the spiritual system comes up. The spiritual wing becomes, balanced out where we can take unprecedented leaps in our spiritual evolution and our spiritual path. And so we just have to change our focus. Realize that we got flim-flammed. I mean, our ancestors, we got flam-flammed. We listened to and bought into a system that was never from God. It was never sustainable. And all systems come to an end. Everything comes to an end. And we've been made weakened, and we, don't have a lot of skills, and we don't have a lot of, social interactions and a family support system, our ability to socially interact with people in agrarian community. I mean, we have all these deficits because of our, entitlements, because of our weaknesses, because of our system. And now that system is collapsing, and that's just, sucky. But for those people who are willing to make that adjustment to a spiritual orientation, connecting to God on a heart-based level, then the world is their oyster. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.